Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Connect Your Audio podcast. I am your host, David Gregors. 100% stunning, 100% brave. It's all very scientific. It's been confirmed at the lab. And actually, this is the second time they've had to test my blood for stunningness and bravery. Because the first time it actually came back for 47% stunning and brave and 53% for Joe Biden. And I knew that wasn't right. So sure enough, I had it retested, and there was some irregularities in the testing process. Let's just say I demanded that they do it on some other machine other than the Dominion provided lab equipment. As you can tell, we have a lot of things going on with this election, as I kind of hinted at here in the beginning. I got an email from someone who says, you're talking about all this stuff. Why don't you talk about the election? Where do you stand? What do you think about what's going on in the election? And I'm going to be honest with you. I've honestly been trying to avoid talking about the election, and the reasons are twofold. The first being that this is a podcast, and I don't know where in the timeline of 2020 or 2021 you're going to come across this podcast, and I don't want to be on record saying something that is proven wrong in the next 30 minutes after this podcast is done, or however long I end up going, and just having egg on my face for having said something stupid that turned out to not be true about the election. The second reason is the whole thing is just one big, gigantic mess, okay? It's one gigantic mess. You have lawsuits going on all over the place, and it's really, really difficult to keep up with what's going on. And so, even as I was preparing for this episode last night, I had multiple alerts come through that changed what I was talking about. So, we're really not set up for success in terms of how this election is analyzed. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a very broad 36,000 feet look at what I see is going on. And I say this with just a couple of caveats. The first caveat is I want you to understand that I really do hope that Donald Trump wins this thing. I really do. I really do. I hope that he comes through this, and I hope that he wins, because I think that this is... I like Donald Trump, and I think that he did win legitimately, but I do think the thing was stolen from him, which means it was stolen from the voters ultimately. But the second caveat is probably the most important, and is probably going to anger the most people. I don't think he's going to win. And I'm saying this from just being very realistic here. So, with all of that said, I want you to understand what is going on. I think that he has a better than zero chance of pulling this off. But understand, what he is attempting to do has never been done before. I mean, I looked online to try to find when the last time a state's electors were not sent to the Electoral College. In other words, another slate of electors were done. And the best I can figure is it was in the 1800s. I really had a hard time finding anything specific to that answer. If you know, please tell me, because I don't. I tend to think it may have been 1824, but I'm not exactly sure. But we're talking about one state is hard enough to do. It hasn't happened in my lifetime. It hasn't happened in your lifetime. He's got to do that times 3. He needs at least 3 states to do that. Those are long odds. And I know better than to count Donald Trump out of anything. I mean, he's surprised me going all the way back to when he first started. When he first came down the escalator, I didn't think he had a chance, and I've been wrong about him before. This is a tough sell. That being said, I think it's better than zero. I think he's got a really good chance in Pennsylvania of doing something that hasn't been done in a very long time, and that is getting Pennsylvania to send another slate of electors. Can he do it in Michigan? Can he do it in Arizona? Can he do it in Nevada? Can he do it in Wisconsin? Can he do it in Georgia? He needs three. I'm just not so sure. It's a tall hill to climb. So I want to start off with an example to try to frame what I'm talking about here. So I want you to imagine that I'm running for dog catcher in my town, and I've got 100 people in my town, including me and including my opponent. And I do have an opponent, and we're running against a very, very passionate race for dog catcher. And on election day, the 100 eligible voters in our town all come together, and they vote, and they count the ballots, and it turns out that I receive 100% of the votes. In other words, I got all 100 people voting for me, including my opponent. As unlikely as that is, it is at least within the realm of possibility. Even if my opponent says, no, there's no way that he could do that because I'm his opponent, I voted for myself, obviously. So it had to have been at least 99-1. Even at that, that's probably not enough to justify even doing a recount. That's a pretty damning number of, I don't think he's going to be able to overcome that. So that election stands, even though it looks like there's some funny business. This is how we've been doing elections for quite some time, at least since the 1960s in the United States, where we accept that there is some funny business going on, but as long as it wasn't close, it was okay. It became a problem in 1960 with the JFK versus Richard Nixon, where JFK beat Richard Nixon by the skin of his teeth. A lot of allegations of voter fraud, and most famously Chicago, but I've seen some indications that Texas may have had some too in favor of Lyndon Johnson. We had this issue in the year 2000 with George W. Bush versus Vice President Al Gore. In that situation, it was less about fraud and more about suppression, but it did come up. We had allegations of it in 2004. We had more allegations of it in 2016 with Russian interference, and now it's just gone haywire. And so for all elections, we've accepted some amount of irregularities, some amount of fraud, some amount of shenanigans, but we've accepted it as long as the election wasn't really close. Now imagine, as we're back in my town, of 100 people, and we're now 2 years later, my former opponent decides he wants to run against me for the dog catcher position, and the town hasn't grown. We still have 100 registered voters. And this time on election day, when their election results come in, I still get 100 votes, but my opponent now gets 75. Well, while it certainly looked suspicious if I got 100% of the votes before, now what you have is you've gone from a suspicion to an actual impossibility. And what happens there is you don't know who won. Who won? We can't tell. In other words, we don't know who did the fraud. We don't know who stuffed the ballot box. We don't know who stuffed the ballot box in whose favor. So it's impossible to tell now who the dog catcher is, and we're going to have to go to court and figure out something. They could take the result as is and let me be dog catcher, even though there is a statistical impossibility. And this too has happened a lot in our elections, where they go back and they find that some number of people voted that was greater than the number of registered voters in a certain area, and we have that in spades in 2020. So what happens in my dog catcher race is we don't know who won. We don't know who won. That's the bottom line. And so somebody's going to have to figure out how to determine who is going to be dog catcher. So when you have this situation spread out over one full state, it becomes a little bit more of a difficult situation. So if I'm dog catcher for the state, you may have 100% turnout over here. You may have 30% turnout over here. You may have some people who are really excited to me in the northern part of the state, where you have other people who aren't so much. And the baseline of X number of registered voters versus X number versus Y number of total votes becomes a little bit more difficult. And if you're stuffing the ballot box, that is actually the ideal situation, because you know you can stuff up to a certain percentage, and it's not without further digging that you will see that there was overvoting in some places. So we have this a lot. We have verifiable proof that this sort of thing has happened in Pennsylvania. We have it in Michigan. I believe we have overvoting in Georgia. Maybe possibly some in Nevada. It's really difficult to tell. But this sort of gives us the framework of what's going on. It isn't that so many people are trying to say, well, there's whatever you do, you're never going to be able to determine, or excuse me, they're never going to be able to flip that many votes from Joe Biden to Donald Trump. That Joe Biden just won by so many more, 20,000, 40,000, 80,000. You're never going to be able to find that many votes that are wrong. That's the wrong way to look at this. The strategy is to go into these states and say, there were so many shenanigans, there were so many things that are wrong with the way this went down, that it is impossible to tell who voted, for whom, who won. It's impossible to tell what the outcome is, because there are at least this many questionable issues. This is actually a good strategy. This is exactly how you want to run this, because we live in a world, a country, where we have a confidential ballot. Nobody knows who we vote for, presumably. Nobody knows who we vote for. Nobody knows what we do. So it's impossible to go back and say, John Smith voted for Donald Trump. You can't do that. So the best you can do is say that there were voting irregularities, there were things that happened that shouldn't have happened. So this is the course that Rudy Giuliani and the Trump campaign officially is on. They went to the Pennsylvania legislature the other day, gave a presentation, very, very good, very strong evidence. It seemed like was well received by the legislature, making the case that the legislature should name its own slate of electors. Now, don't believe the people who say this isn't possible. If you put this in on Google, you're going to get 300 results saying this isn't possible. And you have to dig into the articles and find out that what I'm saying is the one section. They will all admit that what I am saying is the one thing that makes it possible. That is, something happens to where we cannot determine a winner. That basically invalidates the entire election. The whole point of having an election is to determine who a winner is. And so if something happens, whether it's fraud, whether it's an earthquake that destroys all the votes, whatever, that's just a missed chance. It's not disenfranchising anyone. Who's actually disenfranchised people are the ones who stuffed ballot boxes. So this is the path that Rudy Giuliani is on, and I think he did something in Pennsylvania the other day. They're doing a similar thing in Arizona. I think they're going to do it in Michigan, probably in Wisconsin too. Very, very good strategy. He needs 3 of those states. He needs 3 of them. Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood are on a different track. They have distanced themselves from the campaign, or the campaign has distanced themselves from them. But they are on this Dominion voting software track where these really weird anomalies that would happen in the middle of the night. So when I went to bed on election night, I was certain Donald Trump had won. I knew that there were outstanding votes in Atlanta and Detroit and Milwaukee and all that, and I figured it would tighten up once they started counting, but I went to bed once they stopped counting. And lo and behold, I wake up and Donald Trump is losing. So what Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood are looking at are these injections of votes where you would have overnight after everyone went to bed, you'd have thousands upon thousands of votes that would come in for Joe Biden, and they were at a clip of 100% or 95% for Joe Biden and 5 for Trump. And these are statistical impossibilities. Not really impossibilities, but improbabilities, I guess is the better way to say that. And it certainly looks suspicious when you're like Georgia and you have, oh well, we have a pipe burst, so we're not going to count anymore tonight, and then oopsie, we have a winner. It's Joe Biden. Joe Biden stuns the state of Georgia by winning it. I can tell you, having lived in Georgia for most of my life, and knowing the people of Georgia very well, I was actually in Georgia on election day. Donald Trump won Georgia. It was always going to be close, but I just don't see Joe Biden winning the state of Georgia. I just don't. So, without wandering too far off the beaten path here, I think that Pennsylvania is probably the best shot of having a slate of electors. I mean, I think that it's that way by far. I don't see a whole lot of compelling evidence in the other states yet. That being said, I will say that going through the list of states where things are going on, it's really difficult to tell what's going on. Nevada, there were some challenges a couple weeks ago, but it's not really clear what's going on there now. Arizona, they were just talking to the legislature today, so they're kind of at the same point as they were in Pennsylvania. Michigan is a Sidney Powell suit is coming forward. It's unclear what Trump is doing. Georgia, Sidney Powell has already filed a suit going down the Dominion path. There's been some back and forth as to, I guess the latest thing was a judge issued an order saying that the Dominion voting machines couldn't be touched until some later date. That's good. Wisconsin, you have the same sort of issues in that they did in Pennsylvania, which we'll get into. But with Wisconsin, it's actually about drop boxes not being prescribed by law, and possibly contradictory. So there's a lawsuit that was filed by a voter up there, not by the campaign. It looks like another campaign lawsuit is coming soon. The problem with all of this is that Trump has to make the case. Okay? Trump has to make the case, and I think that he's waiting for Pennsylvania or for this thing to get in front of the court, because there's not really a whole lot of reason to make the case unless you start seeing some movement. And the reason I say he's got to make the case is the last thing that Donald Trump wants to do is show up on January 20th being told by the media that he just stole the election. They're going to say that anyway, but it's going to take more than Donald Trump making outbursts on Twitter. It's going to take more than him just saying, oh, it's rigged. We need evidence. He's going to have to make this case that this election was totally screwed up, that it was just another continuation of the effort to remove him, the coup that has been going on for the last 4 years, first with Russia, then with the phony impeachment. This is now the next wave of it. He's got to make that case, or else he's not going to be able to govern. And the left has already shown itself to be quite violent, and people were boarding up their windows and doors and everything on election night, waiting for the leftists to start fires and start burning things down again. If his strategy works, and he's able to overturn, or at least get the legislatures or the Supreme Court to somehow or another overturn the results in those 3 states, in 3 of those states, we're going to be in a very, very dangerous position in our country. And Trump has to make the case to try to hold it together. Now, Trump is in a bad position here, and I don't care what anyone says. This isn't simply his desire to win. This is much, much more important than that. As I stated before, we have a history now in this country of tolerating a certain amount of voter fraud. And I think now is the time to say we're not going to tolerate it anymore. Trump is right to want to look into these issues because they are very, very important. This is the year 2020. I am speaking to God knows how many people on the internet. I have more technology sitting in front of me than all the sum of all technology that came before it. And we can't have a clean, honest vote in the United States of America? Give me a break. Give me a break. So Trump is correct to look into these things, but when you start down this road, you have to be ready for it to work, and that means he's going to have to start making the case. He's, I guess, doing a rally in Georgia for the two Senate seat runoffs that are coming up. That's good. That's a good place to start. But he needs to do more. So we're at a little bit of a holding pattern. So I think that a lot of these are going to go to the Supreme Court at the same time. Pennsylvania, again, is a real problem legally. So the issue in Pennsylvania is the Secretary of State extended the deadline to receive the ballots, these mail-in ballots, all on his own. The Supreme Court's split 4-4 before Amy Coney Barrett, the notorious ACB, was seated. They split 4-4, but they said you should segregate those ballots just in case this comes back. They did not segregate those ballots. And so Justice Alito had to issue his own order saying, look, you need to segregate these things and you need to start doing it now. There's still potentially litigation that can happen around this issue. I don't know if they started segregating. I've seen things that said they didn't. If they didn't, then there's a good chance that Pennsylvania's electors are going to have to either not be seated at the Electoral College or are going to have to be impaneled by the legislature itself. There's some really big issues here. The other issue being the Supreme Court over the weekend, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court rejected rejected a lawsuit that alleged that universal mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania, that provision that allowed that, was an illegal override of the Pennsylvania constitutional provisions regarding absentee ballots. The Supreme Court in Pennsylvania dismissed it on technical timing grounds without reaching the merits, and it's going to be part of what goes to the Supreme Court. They did say that the court did find that there was probably a justiciable issue there, and so we have a number of things, but it can't just be Pennsylvania. That's what I keep coming back to. It can't just be Pennsylvania. It's got to be Pennsylvania and Michigan and Georgia, or Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, and Arizona, or whatever. 306 electoral votes is how many Joe Biden has if the current counts are accepted. He needs to lose 36 of those, actually 37 of those, to get down to 269. If Trump can frustrate enough of what's going on here through his legal challenges and keep Joe below 270, then we go to the House of Representatives and it's President Trump for 4 more years. So this is where we are. I don't think this is going to go that way. I hope that I'm wrong. But I just know that the Supreme Court, maybe with this new Supreme Court with ACB on there, maybe they'll be a little bit bolder. I know Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, Gorsuch, they're not going to have a problem finding the right side of the law. Roberts and Kavanaugh, a little shaky on those two. Not so sure. Roberts for sure. Roberts I don't think is on our side anymore. But Kavanaugh, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. So that's where we stand here. And tomorrow I'm going to discuss a little bit about what a Joe Biden presidency is going to look like and what we should be doing during a Joe Biden presidency, because I think everything changes. And so that's what we have to decide. Up next, we have my quick take segment. This is going to be a new segment, and hopefully, I'm going to try to keep myself under 10 minutes covering this. So, there was a little bit of controversy on Twitter towards the end of last week, and it just made me remember, and I felt the need to share with you that John Brennan, the former CIA director under former President Obama, John Brennan is just a terrible, terrible human being. Felt the need to share that with you, but let me tell you how this whole thing got started. So John Brennan issued a tweet, and his tweets have gotten to be somewhat infamous for his vitriol and nastiness, just general nastiness. But in speaking of the apparent assassination of an Iranian nuclear scientist, John Brennan issued the following tweet. This was a criminal act and highly reckless. It risks lethal retaliation and a new round of regional conflict. Iranian leaders would be wise to wait for the return of responsible American leadership on the global stage and to resist the urge to respond against perceived culprits. He goes on to say, I do not know whether a foreign government authorized or carried out the murder of Fakhrizadeh. But such an act of state-sponsored terrorism would be a flagrant violation of international law and encourage more governments to carry out lethal attacks against foreign officials. These assassinations are far different than strikes. A little rationalization here. These assassinations are far different from the strikes against terrorist leaders and operatives of groups like Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, which are not sovereign states. As illegitimate combatants under international law, they can be targeted in order to stop deadly terrorist attacks. The reason that little caveat was entered there will be forthcoming, I assure you, but what he's talking about here is so hypocritical. And we'll go back to the very, very beginning where he talks about how Iran would be wise to wait for American leadership to change. Well, this is almost verbatim what Michael Flynn got charged with Logan Act violations for. Verbatim what he said to the Russians. He said to the Russians during the transition, hold up, don't respond to what Obama is doing to you yet. We're in the middle of a transition. Let's give us a chance to see what we can work out. And this was blown up by John Brennan. John Brennan took this and ran with it, saying this was a Russian collusion. So it's just complete nonsense. But as I mentioned, John Brennan is just a peach of a guy. And his Twitter feed is something to be seen. I'm just going to give you some of the highlights here. In tweeting towards Donald Trump, he says, your bizarre tweets and recent temper tantrums reveal your panic over the likelihood the special counsel will soon further complicate your life, putting your political and financial future in jeopardy. Fortunately, Lady Justice does not do non-disclosure agreements. On June 23rd, 2018, he says your fear of exposure is palpable, your desperation even more so. When will those of conscience among you and your cabinet, inner circle, and Republican leadership realize that your unprincipled and unethical behavior, as well as your incompetence, are seriously damaging our nation? On March 17th, 2018, he says, when the full extent of your venality, moral turpitude, and political corruption becomes known, you will take your rightful place as a disgraced demagogue in the dustbin of history. You may scapegoat Andy McCabe, but you will not destroy America. America will triumph over you. So, it's just this continues on. He just goes on through this for so long. It never ceases to amaze me how successful you have been at making yourself so small, petty, and banal with your tweets. Yeah, you've got a really good leg to stand on here. Your insecurity is well deserved, as is your concern over the Russia investigation. Thomas Paine was right when he said these are the times that try men's souls. But I think of all of these, this one really takes the cake. This is July 18th, 2019. Compare the words, tone, and spirit of any previous president with the undignified, divisive, and hate-filled invective spewed by Mr. Trump. Until so-called Republicans put nation above party and condemn his vile rants, this crisis will only get worse and much more dangerous for all. I mean, all of those words, the can undignified, divisive, hate-filled, can pretty well succinctly describe John Brennan's entire Twitter feed. But unlike Democrats and never Trumpers, I'm willing to say that it takes a little bit more than tweets to make someone a terrible person, and that's why I did a little research and found out that John Brennan is in fact a terrible person. I go back to an article, this was in 2013 when John Brennan was being nominated for Obama's CIA director. This is Glenn Greenwald. He is a lefty. He's a lefty, no doubt about it. He's a liberal, but he's pretty honest, and he's been very open in criticizing Democrats, particularly John Brennan, in terms of the Russia investigation or the Russia hoax. And in this article, it's entitled, if you want to look it up for yourself, John Brennan's Extremism and Dishonesty Rewarded with CIA Director Nomination. And in this article, he goes on talking about the drastic escalation of wars that happened under the Obama administration. And by the way, this is something people forget. When we're all thinking about Obama and how cool he was and how he was like taking selfies with Ellen and stuff, we forget that Obama was kind of a mass murderer, and John Brennan was right alongside him. Barack Obama bombed a children's hospital. He bombed weddings. He bombed, you name it, civilians, Americans overseas, non-judicial killings. He even bragged, I'm really good at droning people. He rained hellfire down from the sky, quite literally hellfire missiles down from the sky in countries we were not at war with: Yemen, Syria, Libya, Egypt. He did this over and over and over again, and this so-called Arab Spring, which turned out to be a result of meddling by the Obama administration, really blew up in his face. I mean, the Arab Spring, it went really well. We destabilized. It wasn't bad enough we destabilized Iraq with the Iraq War. We further destabilized Egypt, Libya, Syria, Yemen with this so-called Arab Spring, which threatened to bring, I guess, democracy? I don't think that was ever going to happen. What happened was the Islamic State came around. What happened was extremism was given room to grow, and what happened was our ambassador in Libya was killed. We had in Benghazi. What happened is the African slave trade grew back in Libya. John Brennan is not a good guy. He was right alongside every step of the way. Fast forward even further, if you're still not convinced that droning people is enough to make you a bad person, fast forward to 2016, in which John Brennan, according to the Real Clear Investigations report, was a leading figure in the coup attempt to remove Donald Trump from office with this phony Russian nonsense. John Brennan was probably if you had to pick 3 people who were responsible for this coup attempt, John Brennan is no doubt one of those 3. So we've already talked about what happened with Michael Flynn. He tried to jam him up, but this Real Clear Investigations report goes a lot deeper in understanding Brennan's role in all of this. And it talks about how Brennan kind of pumped some people for some information and blew up the information about Russian interference and put it in the hands of Harry Reid, who was then the minority leader, didn't give it to Devin Nunes, just really blew this thing up and tried to frame Donald Trump for Russian collusion. And if that wasn't bad enough, it was just a little short period of time, kind of this lame duck period that we're in now with Donald Trump, that he was doing all of this, trying to get Donald Trump jammed up with Russia. So once he was unceremoniously removed from Washington at the end of the Obama administration, you might be asking why he wasn't taken out in handcuffs. That I know the answer to. We'll get to it. But once he left Washington, he then took his security clearance and went to MSNBC, CNN, everybody he could find to give commentary on Donald Trump's presidency, including information that would lead people to believe that he had information about Russian collusion that turned out to be false. When asked about it later on, once the Mueller report came out and there was no Russian collusion, he was asked about it, he said, "Well, I just believe they had more than they did." And with that little halfway apology, he completely forgot that he was wrong and went right back to hammering Trump for colluding with Russia and obstructing justice. And there's, even in this Real Clear Politics article, there's some information that the impeachment, he may have been linked to it. I mean, this guy is a lifelong spook. He's a CIA guy. The CIA took him in despite the fact that he admitted to voting for a communist in 1976. He said he voted for a communist against Jimmy Carter because he was just fed up with Washington politics and partisanship, and he wanted to make a protest vote. So his best thing for speaking out against partisanship and corruption was to vote for the Russian-backed Communist Party USA. And now in 2020, in 2016 to 2020, he's got the nerve to tell us about Trump and Russia. He has no credibility. He has no credibility. He wasn't marched out because he's a CIA guy. He's a long-time CIA guy, which means he is in the swamp. He is from the swamp. He is part of them, and they will protect him to no end. So this is why I say that John Brennan is a terrible, terrible person, and he should not be listened to. Ted Cruz got into it with him, mentioning the Logan Act thing, and of course they're grumbling back and forth at each other. At one point, John Brennan said that Ted Cruz isn't a good lawyer. Now, Ted Cruz is maybe, and I'm being pretty generous here, one of maybe 100 people in this country who could immediately take over a position on the Supreme Court. Ted Cruz is a lot of things. He's not a bad lawyer, but John Brennan is a bad person. So we'll just leave it at that. Finally, today we have our Today in Culture segment, and I want to talk a little bit about Sarah Fuller. Over the weekend, you may have heard something about this. Sarah Fuller, this young lady at Vanderbilt University, made history by becoming the first female to suit up in a major college football game for Vanderbilt. Now, I don't follow college football, and I'm going to try to not be ignorant or dumb about it. But to me, the kick didn't look all that great. Not to take anything away from her, it's a big accomplishment to get to play college football, especially at a big university like Vanderbilt. But that's the thing, is that it's a big accomplishment for anyone. But still, we're supposed to stop and marvel that this young woman suited up for this college football team and apparently broke through, I guess, a glass ceiling. That's certainly the way Hillary Clinton was portraying it. I say good for Sarah Fuller. Good for her. Good for her. But there's a reason that women do not play football, and it has nothing to do with toxic masculinity or glass ceilings or misogyny or whatever else you want to call it. Football is a sport that is driven by size and strength. That is, size and strength are what determine largely who wins and who loses. There really isn't a glass ceiling in football. It isn't that they can't find a woman who can throw as well as Tom Brady, or a woman who is fast like Emmitt Smith or Jerry Rice. I don't know any current players, but those two, or another Sarah Fuller who could go out and kick. It isn't that part isn't the problem. The part that is the problem is the 350-pound mountains of muscle on the defensive lines who are looking to murder the woman who throws just as well as Tom Brady. I don't know very many people who want to see a woman take a tackle from 350 pound men. But if you do, I think that, well, a lot of words can be said about you if that's something that you want to see, but being interested in equality, that's not one of the things that can be said about you if that's what you're looking for. I know very few women who can actually carry 350 pounds worth of muscle and actually still be able to move. That's one thing that's a genetic, physical difference between a man and a woman. It's okay. It's okay for those two things, for men and women, to be different. Football would probably be just as interesting as it is, at least to me, if you had a team full of women. Because it would not be interesting if every time I turned on a football game, I had to watch a woman being carried off the field because her legs have been shattered by these gigantic men. If you want equality, if you want to pretend that there's a glass ceiling in football that Sarah Fuller has somehow broken, you need to have the equality across the board. And that means that we need to see a woman being tackled by the 350 pound guy. I don't want to see that. And I also don't think that's equality. What's equality is that there's nothing stopping a woman from making a football team of her own. That's what equality is. But mainly I'm tired of people being divided into all these groups. As I said, making a college football team is a huge accomplishment for anybody. It's probably not newsworthy, but it's a huge accomplishment. And Sarah Fuller should certainly be proud of herself for having done that, as would John Smith being assigned to that team or allowed onto the team. It's a huge accomplishment. And so now you see, it's not newsworthy, but it's a huge accomplishment. So it's only newsworthy because she's a woman and she's supposedly breaking through this ceiling. In America, we have this issue where we are subdividing people into groups, and if each one of these groups doesn't have representation in every single thing, then the presumption is that it must be due to some sort of discrimination. Whereas this is simply not true. As I have demonstrated, Sarah Fuller broke through the glass ceiling of football, supposedly. However, had she been tackled, she probably would have been killed. That's a fact of life. If you put a woman on the football field in the NFL, she will probably be killed. It's just a fact of the sport. It's something, could a woman succeed in baseball? Maybe it's not full contact like football is. So maybe you can make the argument that there's a glass ceiling there. But some places there aren't glass ceilings. Sometimes it's a measure of the times. For instance, one of the things that Donald Trump kept saying towards the end of the campaign is he was going to put the first woman on the moon in 2024. Well, I can honestly tell you that doesn't make any difference in my life if he's sending a woman to the moon or a man to the moon or a black person to the moon or a white person to the moon. It doesn't make any difference. Why doesn't it make any difference? There is no glass ceiling in NASA. There may have been in the 1960s, or 70s, but last I checked, we haven't sent anyone to the moon in decades. So it's not really an issue. It may have been an issue in the 1970s, but I'm going to tell you something. In the 1970s, we believed, it seems to me, in something called chivalry, and it was not very gentlemanly to strap a woman to a rocket and send her hurtling into outer space towards a rock with no gravity and no air. That was not seen as something that women should be doing, and that was because the men, it wasn't that they wanted the accolades or they went up there thinking they could die. It was a very real possibility. Men back then cared if women died, but we have had that taken from us. We're not supposed to care. We're supposed to say, oh, it's good. Let's send the woman into the most dangerous thing that we could possibly do, and that's fine. Chivalry is dead. It genuinely is. But chivalry was killed by the women, not the men. Women want you to believe that chivalry was killed by men being too lazy or not being raised correctly, but women killed the chivalry. Simply because a thing exists and there is no representation for some certain group, and yes, I include women in that, does not mean that it is the result of discrimination. It also does not mean that there are children sitting around saying that they can't be astronauts because there's not a woman there, or there is not an African queen there, or there is not an LGBT person. That's not how children work. It's how the left wants you to think children work, but that is not actually how children work. If my daughter, if I had one, if I had a daughter at 6 or 7 years old and she came to me and said, "Daddy, I want to be a football player," I would explain to her that she could play football if she wants to with her friends, but she probably can't be in the NFL because she would get killed. That's just the truth. I'm being a good parent. I'm telling my child the truth. However, when raising a daughter, I would imagine that seeing a woman football player is probably the least of my concerns, the least of the things I would worry about. I'd be more worried about, rapists or possibly toxic masculinity. I don't know. There are a lot of things to be worried about. Female representation on a football team is not one of them. Again, not that it's not a big deal to Sarah Fuller. Congratulations. Again, it's a big accomplishment. But we need to keep it in focus here just a little bit. And I keep seeing, well, she never would have been tackled. She's a kicker. The kickers don't need any strength and all that. Well, she had pads on for a reason. I know a few years ago there were some kickers that went out without shoes on and all that, but I don't think they do that anymore. It's a stupid idea anyway. But again, if you want female representation, why is a female only able to kick? Why should she not be expected to take the hits, just like the guys do? The answer is obvious, but if you're in a position where you're fighting the glass ceilings and tilting at these sorts of windmills, I think it's worth considering. Same thing with the sending people to the moon. If you are fine with women being sent into dangerous situations just for the sake of some sort of sense of equality, I think men would be more than happy to never say, well, women can jump off the sinking ship before the men, or get in the lifeboats before the men can. We can have equality. We can have equality like that. How about women start signing up for the draft? That's equality. But you never notice any people really pushing those lines. You never hear any women complaining that they can't get hired on as a ditch digger. It's just fact of life. It's a fact of life. The issue isn't the equality. The issue is the perceived benefits of having one of these positions. And again, it's normal to want to have those things, but if you're not willing to have the equality all the way, then don't bother asking. Okay, well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed today's show. It's a little bit shorter than I had thought it would be, but that's okay. Join us next time. I don't know what we'll be talking about. Probably what a Biden presidency is going to look like. But yeah, so I hope you'll like, share, subscribe, follow me on Twitter at David Gregors. I've changed the Parler. It's also at David Gregors now, so you can follow me there too. Again, I don't really check it very much, and the podcast is growing. We're on iTunes. We're on a whole bunch of other things that I frankly didn't even know existed. But my people say that it's on there, so that's great news. So everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's show. Like, share, subscribe, tweet, whatever you need to do. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors. If you didn't like the show, don't do any of that. That's okay. We still love you. And until next time, be safe, be well, and God bless.